Hi folks, Tim here again with timsclass.com. Today we're going to cover hand saws. Got a bunch of different ones to go over. These by no means are comprehensive of all the different types of hand saws that are out there. But we've got just a few we're going to cover. You can see most of these are new. We don't use them anymore, with the exception of a couple of them. But let's just start with the basic. This is a big Craftsman regular hand saw. Now, if you'd had the pleasure of growing up in the, I don't know, 50s and 60s, this would have been your best friend building a house. How would you like to have cut every 2x4 in a house with this? Those guys were good, old school. All right, I'm not even going to try and show you how to cut with one, but needless to say, regular hand saw, okay? Look at the teeth. You'll notice this is a fine finish hand saw. And there's a lot of teeth, okay? And the rule is the more teeth, the slower the cut, but the finer the cut. So just keep that in mind as we go through these saws. All right, let's go to this saw. This is commonly known throughout the industry as a hacksaw, typically used for PVC or metal. And you'll notice if you look at the teeth, this is a Lennox blade. But if you look at the teeth, this is for thick metal. And the teeth are just tiny, tiny, tiny. So anytime you're trying to cut something really hard, you want a lot of teeth, okay? But there's your hacksaw. All right, this saw, some of you have probably seen or used before, maybe out in the woods. This is called a bow saw, and look at the teeth on it. We got very few teeth, and they're big, long, and jagged. And the purpose of that is to be able to cut quickly through wood. Okay, it's not going to leave a pretty edge, but it will cut through the wood very quickly, and that's called a bow saw. Okay, let's tell you what, let's slide over here. This is an old school, of course they weren't plastic, most of the time they had wood, and these were miter boxes. And if you look at it real close, you'll see all these different slots for the saw to sit in. So you've got to be able to do a 90-degree right here. It gives you a guide for the saw to move back and forth. You got a 45 coming both ways. And you also have 22.5 degrees. And if you look here, it tells you what each of these different degrees are on top of it. So it just gives you a good idea of how they used to do it back before we had compound miter saws. Okay? This is a piece of crown molding that was cut on a compound miter saw. And you can see how that would go together, okay, to form a perfect angle on that. And keep in mind, this is crown, so it goes at an angle. So that's the reason it's kind of an odd cut. So if I were to set this in this saw, I've already placed my setting there. I would have to set it in at that angle, and then I would have to set my saw at the 45. And if you look from this angle right here, you can see how that would have matched perfectly right through here. The saw would have cut that angle for me. All right, give you a good taste of it. This saw is called a back saw, and it's used specifically for trim in a miter box. Put that back. Okay. This particular saw is a very handy saw. It's actually still used quite a bit today. It's called a jamb saw. If you've ever had to lay tile, you'll know that the trim of the door goes all the way down to the subfloor. Well, if I'm gonna lay tile, I have two options. I can either cut my tile to match the profile of that trim, or I can use a back saw. I can take my tile, lay it on the floor as a spacer for how high I want it cut up, and then I'd set the back saw on it and cut my trim off of the door. That way the tile can just slide squarely underneath the door. And notice it's got a setup on it where you can quickly and easily adjust whether you're trying to cut on the left side of the jamb or you're trying to cut on the right side of the jamb. Okay, jamb saw, very handy. Let's cover this saw before we cover the last one. This is a fairly new little saw. It's called a tight space saw. Plumbers use these a lot. If you happen to be up in a crawl space and you've got to cut through a pipe, PVC pipe or even a copper pipe. This is a great saw if you need to use a saw, if you don't have pipe cutters, to be able to get up in there in those tight spaces and be able to cut those off. So once again, that's a tight space saw. Last saw we're going to cover is a coping saw. Trim carpenters use this all the time. When I'm doing trim work, I've got two options, okay? I can 45 both corners. This is some quarter round that goes along the base. I can 45 both sides where I can put them together, and that works great most of the time. But what if you've got a wall that's not strictly on a 45? Maybe it's out a couple of degrees and we've got a gap there, okay? Now my options are to caulk it and paint it, which is fine, but sooner or later that caulk will give way. My other option is to cope out an edge with the coping saw. What I do is take that 45, you can see right here, and I would just cope that out. So I would use this saw to cope that out. Now I can just do a square cut to my wall. If you can picture that not being there, that would go to that wall, and this would just go over the top of it. So now it really doesn't matter if it's square. That cope is going to hold it. And that's what the purpose of the coping saw is. All right, hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hand saws. Hope you never have to use them.